This is a quick tour of how to set up and use the mvWorkstation with D3 Unix. A little bit of housekeeping first. Please take a second to read the disclaimer and my bio. Some things to consider before we begin. When I say D3 Unix, I am talking about both D3 AIX and D3 Linux as they function identically for the purposes of the workstation. The workstation became a part of D3 as of 10.3.1 to facilitate D3 being the upgrade path for mvBase, another Rocket multi-value flavor. So 10.3.1 is the minimum D3 version to use the workstation. The Windows client component is part of the D3 Windows installer, and as such will only install on recent versions of Windows, including Windows 10 and Windows 2012, 2016, and 2019 servers. The workstation allows users in a firewall-protected local or home office to telnet to a remote instance of D3 without a VPN and without opening telnet ports on the remote D3 server. This is a big security win. The workstation also allows a remote D3 server to connect to printers in a local or home office without the need for a VPN or other pricey remote printing options. Before we begin, let's get an overview of the steps you'll be taking. First, we'll configure the workstation to start during D3's cold start process. Next, we'll configure the listener to stop when D3 is shut down. Then we'll install the workstation client on Windows. We'll then configure and test a Telnet server. And lastly, we'll configure the workstation to run as a Windows service instead of in Foreground. Let's log on to the DM account on a D3 Unix server. From TCL, do a netstat AN and grep for 1718 to verify that there is no listener on TCP port 1718. D3WS listener is the command we use to start the workstation listener. If run with no options, it will start a listener on TCP port 1718 for the PIC0 VME. But in my experience, it's a good idea to specify the TCP port and VME even if you're using the default values. If for no other reason, then it's more self-documenting. So to run the command from the user cold start, do bang D3WS listener -P 1718 -N PIC0 with an ampersand, where the bang shells out to Unix. The -P specifies the TCP port, -N specifies the VME, and the ampersand tells Unix to run this in background. You can also run that command from TCL, so you don't have to restart D3 to start the workstation listener. Do the netstat command again, and you'll see that now there's a listener on 1718. Getting the workstation listener to stop is a little trickier than getting it to start, as there is no -K or similar option for the command. What you have to do is identify the workstation's PID and do a Unix kill. To facilitate this, I wrote a small program that can be executed from user shutdown, which after 33 years of multi-value experience, I just found out about recently. Create and compile the program shown in the slide. Call it killWS and put it in the SQL demo account in a BP file. You can put it anywhere you want in your application to call it whatever you want, actually. Note that it executes a PSEF that greps for D3WS listener, then subgreps for the TCP port. This allows you to start and stop a workstation listener for multiple VMEs, each on its own TCP port, and kill it without killing a workstation listener that's servicing another VME. Then create a user shutdown macro in the DM account if it doesn't already exist. Add the command run whatever BP killWS or whatever you call the program. Okay, let's test the shutdown process. Do a shutdown and let D3 shut completely down. Do the netstat and verify that the workstation listener has stopped. Then start D3 again and do the netstat to verify that the workstation listener has started. Now comes the fun part for you Unix guys. Windows and the D3 Windows installer. You need to download the 10.3.1.exe installer from the Rocket community portal. So launch a browser and go to my.rocketsoftware.com, which will take you to the RCP login. If you don't have credentials, contact us and we'll get you set up. Click the Downloads tab. Scroll down and click the Rocket D3 group. Scroll up and click the D3-66960 D3 Windows 10.3.1 group. Click the 1031.exe link and click Save to save the exe in your downloads directory. I like to move my installers out of the downloads directory into a more permanent spot, so do that. Then double-click the installer, and note that this slide shows me using 10.3.2, but 10.3.1 is the same for these purposes. You'll probably be nagged by the user account control police, so click Yes, and click Yes to allow this app to make changes. Accept the terms of the license agreement. When presented with the choice to change the install directory, resist the temptation to do so and click Next. And if you do select another install path, you only need to worry about the top one. The database and virtual directories are only relevant when doing a full D3 install. You're only installing one small component. Click the Custom Radio button and click Next. Expand the Servers dropdown and select the red X to prohibit the installation of any server components. Expand the Client dropdown and select the red X on everything except the mvWorkstation to prohibit the installation of any unneeded client components. Click Next. Enter the DNS resolvable name of the D3 Unix server and click Next. Click Next on the service installation settings, or rather the service installation settings. Click Install. The installer will crank for a little while. And when it's done, you'll see an Install Shield Wizard Complete panel. Click Finish. Now it's time to configure the workstation. For the sake of brevity, in this video, we'll just install a Telnet server. Configuring printers and other stuff will be covered in other sessions and is well documented elsewhere. Press the Windows thingy on the left of the taskbar. Scroll down to the Rocket D3 group and expand it. Click on the Device Manager. Again, with the UAC and Allow Changes dialogs, just click Yes. When the Workstation panel comes up, click the Workstation tab, which is on the far right, so you'll probably need to scroll right or expand the panel. Click Configure. Highlight the Telnet Servers tab and click Add. Enter a brief name in the MV Telnet Server text box. Enter the DNS resolvable name of the D3 Unix server in the MV Server name text box. Enter a TCP port number on which you want this workstation client to listen. 23 is the default, and you should probably move it to avoid conflicts. In this example, I used 2323. Click OK. You'll now see your just added Telnet server in the configured Telnet servers list. You'll notice that it's enabled. Click Close. Time to start the Workstation client as a Foreground application. So click Start. Okay, let's test this puppy. I'll use PuTTY, but you can use any terminal emulator you want. Wintegrate, Accuterm, the NT40 Telnet client, whatever. You need to configure 3 properties at a minimum. The host name or IP address, which is localhost in this example. The TCP port, which must match the TCP port specified when you defined the Telnet server previously, which is 2323 in this example. And the connection type, obviously click Telnet. In PuTTY, you would now click Open. For whatever terminal emulator you're using, do the equivalent. Notice the display, Welcome to the MV Telnet server. You are also told what line and server you're connected to. Log into D3 like you normally would. Do a list U or an LU and observe that you're in D3 just like normal. Now it's time to stop the Workstation Foreground application so you can start it as a Windows service. Click Stop. Click Yes when asked if you want to stop the workstation. First, you need to install the workstation as a Windows service. Click Install. Enter the appropriate Windows account name. It's a good idea to use an account with admin privileges, and you may need to specify a domain as well. Enter and confirm the account password. If the account is not valid or the password is wrong, you'll be presented a D3 Device Manager entry error. Try again. If you can't get this to work, contact D3 Rocket support. When you get the installation successful message, click OK. Time to finish configuring the Windows service and start the workstation. Launch the Windows Service Control Manager. Scroll down to the mvWorkstation line. Right-click and click Properties to change the startup mode of the service. Now go back to the Device Manager Workstation tab. Highlight the Workstation service in the Run As list. Click Start. You have now successfully set up the workstation and connected it to your D3 Unix server. Again, there's more you can do with this than setting up Telnet, but that's a story for a different day. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or problems, please contact Rocket D3 support.